Okay, so thanks for everyone who is able to join, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. The webinar today is essentially around increasing efficiency with native NetSuite AP automation, provided of course by SquareWorks. So I will give you some background into both SquareWorks as well as our AP Automation Suite before we actually jump into the demonstration of the technology, which is where we will spend the majority of our time today. The primary feature that we will be highlighting today is AI and OCR, but we will cover the other features that are included in our AP Automation Suite as well. So just a quick introduction, my name is Bob Blaisdell and I lead our sales and marketing team here at SquareWorks. I have been with the organization for over a year and have participated very materially in the growth of the organization on both the AP automation side of our business as well as the professional services side. So I'll talk more about that in just a moment, but I also have my colleague Mike Johnson on the line. So Mike is based in Charlotte and he has worked in numerous capacities throughout the organization, including implementing this technology, as well as on the product side of the house in developing and doing R&D on the solution as well. So he is a great resource to have doing this demonstration. And if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to add those to the chat as we're going through the meeting today. And then hopefully we will have a few minutes at the end as well for live Q&A. So just a little bit of background on SquareWorks for those of you who are not familiar. We are both an SDN as well as an alliance partner of NetSuite's. We were founded in 2016. We have close to 40 employees today. So we're a small enough organization that we can be very flexible, easy to work with. We're very nimble, but we do add a lot of value in the context of both AP automation, which again is our focus for today, but also on the professional services side of the business, which I'll just briefly touch upon in case you do have any needs as far as that goes. So we have served over 600 customers today with our AP Automation Suite and or our professional services, and we can help with things like implementations of NetSuite. We can do optimizations for existing deployments of NetSuite. We also have a premium support group that can handle ongoing support needs as it relates to NetSuite. But again, our focus today is on our product side of the house, which is AP automation. So we will jump into that. And basically, you know, what AP automation is the very first financial automation platform of suites that was created by SquareWorks, but it's built entirely within NetSuite, and that is our biggest differentiator. We provide AP automation within the NetSuite user interface, which helps to drive overall user adoption. And you'll see that once we get into the demonstration of the technology. The AP Automation Suite is the first suite of what we call our Automate platform. So when you hear the word automate, that's kind of the broader umbrella of the platform that SquareWorks brings to the table. Today, it's also the only suite within Automate, but we are very close to releasing additional suites and more to be announced on that in the future. So the way that the AP Automation Suite is packaged is in terms of editions, and we won't get too deep into this today, but organizations, customers can purchase the AP Automation Suite editions based on their needs in terms of features and functionality. So we will help to just help organizations determine which edition is the best fit for them. So we will cover all of the features within the suite today as well, as I had mentioned previously. So moving forward, there are a number of features, again, that make up the AP Automation Suite. Everything is sort of centralized in a dashboard, but we have everything from OCR and invoice scanning to real-time three-way match, There is some approval automation where even folks outside of NetSuite licensing can be a part of that approval process of invoices and other potential documents that you may need approval for within the organization, because that is done via email. And then we do have the capabilities of doing more comprehensive and automated vendor onboarding, where a link is sent out to a vendor, and then they can help submit that information, which would get pulled directly back into your NetSuite environment. And then outside of that, we do have a couple of add-ons as well. And one of those is advanced check printing. So that is the one solution that we won't be demonstrating today. We do have a demonstration right on the website, on SquareWorks website, I should say, in relation to advanced check printing. So I would recommend you going there if there is any interest in check printing. And you can see that basically the AP Automation Suite is designed to sort of complement and enhance what NetSuite does out of the box. So with that, I'm actually going to turn my sharing over to Mike Johnson. So with that, Mike, please take it away and we can get right into the demonstration.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. As Bob talked about, as we go through the demo here today, if you have questions and you want to drop them into the chat section, I'll do my best to monitor that and to answer those as we go through. Otherwise, if you want to save some questions to the end, we'll make sure that we try to save some time to address those. So to just give us a high overview of what we're going to walk through today, the first thing that we're going to look at, and what's actually on my screen right now, is our dashboard. So Bob kind of talked about how this ties together a lot of the functionality that we have to offer in our AP automation solution. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at this. Then we're going to talk about purchase orders. I know there's people from a lot of different industries probably on this call, some using purchase orders, some not using purchase orders, but do want to take a few minutes to talk about how our solution can help with purchase orders if you are using purchase orders. We'll talk about a three-way match solution, how we can check item receipts as you enter them into NetSuite and see if they cross any variances that you set up. Then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about our OCR. Again, that's going to be a little bit of a focus. So we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about how the AI-enabled OCR handles multiple different scenarios depending upon how your business process is built. Then we'll talk about our approval solution, how you can route those bills for approval. And at the very end, we'll talk about our advanced vendor onboarding solution. That's a high overview of everything that we're going to cover in our time here today. So again, the executive dashboard that Bob mentioned here is something that ties together a lot of our functionality. Again, our solutions sit natively right inside of NetSuite. So this is right inside my instance, my demo instance of NetSuite. I'm able to access this dashboard. The dashboard is dynamic. It does have different views. So depending upon your job function, if you're really more focused on purchases and purchase orders, you can switch over to the purchases view of the dashboard and get information there. If you're really focused on vendor onboarding, you can switch over to the vendors view of the dashboard, get information there about vendors and different statuses. On the side, there's helpful links to other searches and things that you can get to right at your fingertip as well. So we'll come back to this dashboard during multiple times of our call here together, just to look at the different functionality that we have. But again, the first thing that I want to go ahead and look at is some purchase order functionality. So from the purchases dashboard here, I can actually see a list of all my open purchase orders that I have within NetSuite, so tie in right back to native NetSuite functionality. I created one ahead of time just to save us a little bit of time on the demo since we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to open up that purchase order and talk through a little bit of the functionality that we have here. So the first thing that we have to offer on purchase orders, if you are using purchase orders within NetSuite, is what we call advanced help. So our advanced help solution is a way that if you have some sort of help documentation that you want to display to your users as they're working in NetSuite, entering purchase orders, they can get that information right with the click of a button and be able to display that in a split screen view. So I've attached just some NetSuite documentation on entering a purchase order, but for your organization, if you have like a checklist, 10 things you need to do before you submit your purchase order, you could easily give that to your users at their fingertips right within NetSuite without them having to, juggle screens or anything like that. The other thing that we have to offer on purchase orders is what we call our advanced document management. So our advanced document management is a little bit of an enhanced drag and drop way to attach files. So we give you this box here right on the purchase order that if you have a file that you want to attach, you can easily grab that. And I'm just going to grab like an example quote. Maybe this is some supporting documentation for my purchase order here. I can easily just drag that onto the box here. It's going to be uploaded into NetSuite for me, and it's going to be attached to this Files tab right here. So again, you can attach files within NetSuite, but it can be numerous clicks to actually get those files attached in the right folder that you want. We really streamline that process, organize them nicely onto this Files tab, and also add the ability to view PDF files attached in a split screen view as well. So again, just saving you some time, not having to download files. If you just wanted to quickly reference them, you can easily see whatever you attached in a split screen view without leaving NetSuite. The other thing that we have to offer here on purchase orders, if you're using them, is our approval automation solution. I'll get into some more detail about how our approval automation works when we talk about bill approvals, but I did just want to highlight that it is an option on purchase orders as well. So if you're using our approval automation solution, we will add this approval history tab to the purchase order record. It's going to include all of the information about who approved this purchase order, as well as any comments that they made in the process. Again, we'll talk about how flexible our approval solution is. It can handle a lot of different approval use cases, and it does work on purchase orders if your organization is using purchase orders. The rest of the purchase order record that you see here is, again, just really native NetSuite functionality. Since our solutions sit right inside of NetSuite, all of this other information, the fields that you're seeing here, is just how my demo environment is set up. But your purchase order form would look like however your purchase order is set up within NetSuite. So it's very flexible. All of that customization work that you've already done to set this up is already going to be there for you. So the next thing I want to talk about is our three-way match solution. Again, if your organization is using item receipts, is actually receiving physical goods and tracking those within NetSuite, you can leverage our real-time three-way match to compare those item receipts against the purchase order as they're entered, making sure that they're not crossing any of the tolerances that you've set up. So the process to begin that actually just starts by entering the item receipt into NetSuite. You can do that from the purchase order just by clicking the Receive button. Again, this is just a native NetSuite process. We don't change anything there. It's going to take me to a screen where I can essentially tell NetSuite how many of these goods that I have had on my purchase order I've actually received from my vendor. So if you receive partial shipments, you can enter multiple item receipts against a purchase order. All those kind of things are supported by NetSuite, and they're supported by our three-way match solution. Essentially what happens is when I tell NetSuite how many of these goods I've actually received, let's say I tell NetSuite I've received 30 toner cartridges and maybe 15 printers for whatever reason. When I go to hit save is when you'll see our real-time three-way match validation run, and it's going to report any issues that it finds of crossing those tolerances. So tolerances can be set up kind of on a default level. So you can have like one set of tolerances that's just your standard tolerance across the board. However, our solution's flexible to have tolerances for specific items, for specific vendors, or even on a subsidiary level if you have multiple subsidiaries within NetSuite. There's a lot of ways that you can set up these tolerances, and you'll see that it's going to report to you in real time when something crosses a particular threshold that you've set up. So right now we can see that line 1 of this item receipt is crossing my PO threshold as well actually as line 2. If I hover over the little eye icon, I can get a little bit of information here about what the actual issue was. It's telling me that the PO quantity is 15 on line 2, but the total received quantity is 20. So I actually did receive on a separate item receipt 5 additional printers, and then I'm trying to receive this additional 15. So it's letting me know the total that I'm trying to receive is 20. That's over my PO threshold. So again, our solution does support if you're entering multiple item receipts at multiple times, we can support that. If this was just an error by me and I had fat fingers, typed the wrong number, I can quickly hit cancel and go back and fix it. if this was an actual mistake on the vendor and I want to do some additional investigation, maybe into what's going on and come back to it, I can actually click Save with Variances, enter a comment here. That's going to be stored on the record, so I can always get back and see what those variances were until they're resolved. I'm going to go back here though and just resolve this for the sake of our demo here. Let me just go back and change that to what's remaining and click Save. Again, we'll see that real-time two-way match validation run, and as long as there's no issues, it's going to let me proceed and create that item receipt. So once I've actually received my items, if you are using purchase orders and item receipts, the next thing that you would expect is that your vendor is going to send you an invoice, right? They're going to expect to be paid for either the goods or the services that they've provided to you. And that's where our AI-enabled OCR can come into play and help with expediting the processing of those. So if your vendor's sending you an invoice, there's two ways that you can get those into NetSuite to have them processed by our OCR solution. One way is through email. If your vendor's already sending you an email with the PDF invoice attached, what most of our clients will do is just have those forwarded into NetSuite. They can be scanned by the OCR and just be waiting for you to process right within NetSuite. The other option that you have is a drag and drop interface right from the dashboard. So I'm going to show you the drag and drop because it's a little bit easier to demonstrate than an email, but you would have both available to you. It's not something that you have to pick one or the other. Both are available to you to use whenever you need to. Going back to the payables dashboard here, again, is where I can get to that link to go ahead and upload my bills if I want to use the drag and drop. You'll see it gives me a box where I can drag and drop my files, or I can click and browse my computer if I'd like to. So I've created a couple different demonstration invoices for us to look at. Let me go ahead and select those here. And I'm going to just drag and drop those onto the box here. Our solution does supporting, if you are using the drag and drop, it does support uploading more than one invoice at a time, which is kind of nice. Some solutions would make you upload one at a time, which can be a little bit cumbersome, but ours can upload multiple if you'd like to. I'm just going to select 2 here and go ahead and hit upload. As soon as I do that, you can see in real time, the OCR is going to start scanning those files and trying to extract the relevant information that it can off of them. One thing I do want to just make note of about our OCR solution is that it does only support PDF files for scanning. If your vendor is sending you or typically sends you files that are not PDF, the OCR is not able to scan those, and they would need to be converted to a PDF, which can be as easy as just saving as a PDF. Industry standard is most people are sending PDFs, so we don't find that as a large issue. And most vendors, if they're not sending you a PDF today and you ask them to, they can typically comply with that. As soon as it finished scanning those files, it took me to what we call the invoice queue. So from my dashboard, this is the same place I would get to by clicking the bills to review link. This is a list of all bills that have been scanned by the OCR and are waiting to be turned into a bill within my instance of NetSuite. You can see some high-level information from the invoice right in the queue itself, like the vendor name, the invoice number that was extracted, if we detected that there was a PO number on the invoice, invoice date, and amount. So again, if maybe an invoice was missed and you are scanning it and you notice that the invoice date's a little bit older, you can quickly see that information and maybe decide that you want to go ahead and process that one first. The other thing that we display to you in the queue is whether we've detected that this is a duplicate. If you upload the same invoice multiple times, or your vendor maybe sends you the same invoice multiple times, we're going to give you that little reminder here that this is potentially a duplicate, maybe not something that you want to actually go ahead and process. If something does get uploaded by accident or it's a duplicate for some reason, you can quickly remove that from the queue with the link on the right side of the screen here. If you're ready to go ahead and process one of these as an invoice, or I'm sorry, as a vendor bill within NetSuite, then you can use the create bill link on the left side of the screen. What I'm going to do is, again, walk through a couple different scenarios because I know there can be multiple people on this call that are doing multiple kinds of bills within NetSuite. The first one I'm going to process is just really a standard bill for items. It's going to look like that purchase order that we created, or I showed you at the top of the call here. The other bill that I'm going to process is going to be for people that typically track services on POs. they set up their POs typically a little bit different. So I'm gonna talk about how our solution can help with those type of service POs, as well as just a standalone bill. So if you have bills that you're entering into NetSuite, you're not using purchase orders, or that particular type of bill does not typically have a purchase order, we'll talk about how our solution handles those. So the first one I'm going to grab here is this item-based PO. I'm going to go ahead and click the Create Bill link. It's going to open me up into a new tab here. Again, it's not taking me out of NetSuite. Our solutions are all keeping you right within NetSuite, but it's opening me up into a new tab so that I have easy access back to my queue if I were to need it. And it's going to display a split screen view to me. So on the left side of the screen, I'm going to be able to see the invoice that was scanned by the OCR solution. And on the right side of the screen, I'm going to see my native vendor bill form. I see there's a question. I'll come back and address that here in a second. So you'll see that my native vendor bill form is on the right side of the screen. It's taken the OCR data and it's populated a lot of the information that it can, like the purchase order number that it detected, the vendor that it detected, the date. It populated the date for me. It took the items that it found on that purchase order, it pulled them forward to the bill for me, and then it used the OCR data here to match what's on the invoice to the items that I had on my purchase order, filling in the quantity, rate, amount accordingly. Any other coding details that I'd already done on my purchase order, like departments, classes, locations, all of that information is going to be pulled forward onto this bill for me. So there was a question about does the OCR learn from manual fixes? There are certain elements that the OCR will learn from manual fixes. In an instance like you described, Stephen, where the vendor decides to put to kind of change the way that the purchase order number is set up. We actually have what we call a rules engine that we can develop rules around extracting different character like that to detect the PO number. So the short answer is there are certain places that the OCR will learn. If there are things, fringe cases where it's something that it can't learn, we do have a rules engine that can help with some of those. Another question was asked if it will separate invoices that are sent in the same file. Separate multiple invoices that are sent in one PDF. The answer to that question is no. It would require, our solution does require that each invoice be a separate PDF file. So it can support multiple page invoices, but we treat one file as a separate invoice. So each invoice needs to be its own file. All right, so going back here, we can see that the information that was extracted here. Let's say, for instance, right, we can see that this data was brought over here, but we'll talk about our three-way match solution again for a second on the bill. Let's say that my vendor tried to overbill me for my toner or my printers here. Let's say they tried to bill me for 30 of these. The OCR would have brought 30 in here. When I go hit save, we'll actually see that our three-way match validation is going to run again because this is linked with a purchase order. And the same kind of thing that I saw in an item receipt, it's going to let me know of anything that crosses those tolerance thresholds that I've had. So the nice part about this is instead of me having to go back to the purchase order, keep up with all these bills that I've already entered into the system, our three-way match solution is doing that, and it's notifying me in real time if it finds any issues. Go back here and just correct this. Go ahead and hit save. Again, as long as there's no issues, it will let me, oops, what is it telling me my issue is now? Oh, so it's letting me know I still have an issue because I've actually received 15 and they're trying to bill me for 10 of this. So actually, when I created this invoice file, I made a typo and I invoiced it incorrectly. So let's go ahead and save with variances and we'll look at how that looks here. So there's a question asked, but if it would tell you if you don't have enough money left on the PO. So the three-way match solution can be used to that, right? We can set up a total amount threshold. So essentially saying if the bill is going to cross the total amount of the PO, then that would report a variant and you could know that in real time. All right, so just going to quickly show you, because I set up my invoice file here wrong. If you do decide to save a bill with variances, it's going to be tracked on the bill itself here, right? So we're going to see that information of what the variances are. That's going to be stored and tracked within NetSuite for you. If the PO is ever updated, maybe I go back, I update my PO, and I receive those additional items, I can actually recheck for variances, and as long as the variances are resolved, this is going to go away. So there are ways that you can kind of resolve those variances automatically. We also do attach the invoice to the record within NetSuite. So if you ever want to get that split screen view back and view the invoice file that was attached, you can quickly do that by clicking this View Invoice button. So I'm going to go back and talk about a different use case, right? So we've talked about what happens if we're using purchase orders to receive physical items, but some industries choose to kind of set up POs for services, maybe to track obligations for consulting firms or things like that, to track spend. And our solution can help in a lot of those use cases as well. So I set up a different kind of purchase order. It looks a little bit different. And I've set up a bill here to kind of demonstrate the way that works, if that's the way your organization works. So in this particular case, I'm getting an invoice that's for a bunch of consulting services, maybe for an attorney or something like that. And what a lot of organizations do when they're setting up their purchase orders like this is they flop the dollar amount into the quantity field and they set the rate at 1. So this allows them to draw down the value of the purchase order as multiple bills come in. And our solution can detect these single line kind of what I like to refer to as a quasi blanket purchase order. It can see that there's a single line purchase order with a rate of 1 and a quantity of over 1. And it can take the total amount. What it's actually going to do is take the total amount of the bill here, populate it into the quantity automatically for you so that you get the same behavior that you would typically be doing when you receive this bill, not necessarily caring about the line level information, just tracking this versus your single line PO, drawing down the value of that, blanket, quote unquote, blanket PO that you've, billed another $9,800 against this. Again, if you're using our through a match solution, it can also operate as like a two-way match. So in this case, you probably wouldn't be receiving anything, but it can still check the purchase order and let you know when you're over the total spend. So let's say I set up a $50,000 purchase order for Delta Consultants, and I want to track the bills that they enter against that until I reach that $50,000 dollar amount. Then when I go over that, it would let me know that I've crossed that threshold. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and that's where you can see that three-way match validation run. And NetSuite's just letting me know I'm backdating a transaction. So the same kind of thing, I'm going to have a bill created here in NetSuite that I could then route for approval. We got a couple more questions. I'm going to go ahead and look through those and address those before we move on. There's a question about whether we can handle expense items and expense tab items and then NetSuite items on the same purchase order. That's not an issue. We can handle both expenses and items. Does this work with other currencies besides USD? It does work with other currencies besides USD. That part of that depends on your setup of NetSuite. So you have to have multiple currencies enabled within NetSuite for us to be able to select those other currencies in your instance of NetSuite. But yes, if you have multiple currencies, we can detect the currency and try to associate that correctly for you. Reading a question here. All right, so I see there's a question about a potential enhancement, and we can make note of that and take that to the team. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward, we're going to talk about what would happen if you have a standalone bill. So potentially a lot of industries, if you're not using purchase orders, or even if you are using purchase orders, you may have overhead bills that you don't choose to track on purchase orders, and you still want to be able to process those through our solution. So you are able to do that. Same thing as I did with the other invoices that we have in my queue. I can easily see that I have this invoice here that does not have a purchase order, or at least we didn't detect that there was a purchase order number on it. I can easily still come to the invoice queue and click the create bill link, and it's going to take me and show me that same split screen view. So you can see with all of these types of invoices that I'm showing you, the process is still the same. You go to the invoice queue, you click the create bill button to go ahead and process them. It doesn't matter the type of bill. There's not different things that I have to go do. It's really just how our solution handles the different cases that there might be. So from the split screen view, I can see that the vendor was detected for me, the date was filled in for me, the invoice number was filled in for me. We actually, just to let you know, we don't actually detect the due date from the invoice itself. We use some native NetSuite functionality. I can track what my terms are with a particular vendor on that vendor record. Our solution is going to look at that, and it's going to pull in and calculate the due date accordingly. At a line level, we can see a little bit of a different behavior here. Because this wasn't associated with a purchase order, we didn't necessarily know what items or expense accounts you were expecting to be charged from this particular vendor. So our solution has to look somewhere else. And what our solution does is it's going to pull in the information that it finds here on the invoice. And then it's going to look at previous invoices that you've entered for this vendor. And it's going to try to find any similarities that it can to the bill that it's seen here. If it can find any similar lines that it's seen previously, it's going to pull forward those coding details, like like the account that was used, the department, the class, and the location. And it's going to go ahead and populate those for me. So in the past, I've entered a bill for Delta Consultants for some consulting services, and I coded those to a miscellaneous expense account. The solution saw that, and it is pulling those values forward for me. If any of these values are incorrect, then you can come and you can change these. So let's say that this was a miscellaneous expense, but maybe we've now added a professional fees service, a professional fees account to our chart of accounts, and I need to update this. I can go through and I can update these coding details. We don't lock down your ability to make changes here, so I could update those if I'd like to. And when I click save, the solution is actually going to learn from that. So it's going to learn that maybe in the past we did use miscellaneous expenses, but going forward, if it sees these kind of consulting services, we need to go ahead and code those to the professional fees account. Same thing with department, class, location, any other custom coding that you might have. Someone did ask about the PO can't be changed after the bill is created, and that is true. That's actually part of native NetSuite. So the link between purchase order and vendor bill has to be made at the time of create. Our solution has to follow that just native NetSuite rule and make that link. You cannot change the purchase order after the bill's been created. And I think just to be clear, so you can make updates to the bill if you need to, but the actual linking of the purchase order has to be done when the bill is created. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click save here. Again, as soon as I hit save, the bill record is going to be created in NetSuite, and I can choose to route that for approval. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and take us through is our approval solution. So we kind of looked at this a little bit on the purchase order, even though I had already approved the purchase order, but the same approval automation can work on bills as well. The first step in the process is to go ahead and submit the record for approval, whether this is a purchase order or a bill. You would have this submit for approval button to go ahead and click and start the approval process. Our approval solution can look at a bunch of different things for determining where we need to route for approval. So we can look at classification details like subsidiaries, departments, combinations of the two. We can even look at line level details like department, class, location, if you need a route based on that. I've set up rules based on if a bill hits a certain account, maybe a certain person needs to look at it. So it's very flexible in the steps and the process that we set up for you to determine your approval needs. So when I submit that for approval, essentially our solution is going to look at this particular bill and it's going to decide where it needs to route for approval based on the rules that we've set up. All of those rules, again, will be stored on the record here in NetSuite on our approval history tab. We can see that I'm listed as one of the approvers here. So I have approve and reject buttons right within NetSuite. I could go ahead and approve this. However, one of the big differentiators of our solution is we do allow for approval outside of NetSuite via email. So as soon as I submitted this for approval, I received an email that looked like this, letting me know that I have a bill that's waiting my approval. I do get an attachment of that bill right here attached to the email. So if I want to view the invoice that the vendor sent me, I can easily do that, as well as coding details, or I should say information about the bill from NetSuite itself. We can customize this information based on your instance of NetSuite. If the essentially, as long as the information is on the record within NetSuite, we can include those details here, so your approvers have that for reference right in the body of the email. If your approver wants to approve this from email, they can easily just click one of the corresponding buttons here. It's actually going to open up a response. They can still enter a comment, click send. This is processed by our solution, and the approval or rejection takes place. The nice part about this process is all of this can be done right here. Approval via email can be done without the need for a license to NetSuite. So if you have people that just need to be involved in the approval process, but don't necessarily need to be in NetSuite for their other daily functions, they can approve via email. Really cuts down potentially on the amount of licenses that you need for NetSuite, which can be pretty costly. Someone asked about if you can create rules that if the PO is already approved and there's no through and match variance, would the bill automatically be approved? And yes, that can be done. Very common use case that people will do something like that. If the spend's already been approved on the purchase order and everything matches, there may be no additional reason for the bill to go through approval. So I'm going to go back into NetSuite here. And I'm just going to click approve just to show you that if you have access to NetSuite, if your approver does have access to NetSuite, they're still going to be granted or greeted with a pop-up to enter approval comment. Let's say this looks good. When I enter that approval comment, again, it's going to be captured here on the approval history tab. And our solution is going to look and check and see if there's any additional approval steps that need to happen for this bill to be approved. In my demo environment, I do have a second step. I have a pretty simple two-step approval process. So it's moved on to step 2 of the approval process here, waiting on Chris or Robert to go ahead and approve. Because I'm not one of those approvers, you can see I don't have approve and reject buttons anymore. So we'll quickly talk about how our AP automation solution allows for management of the approval process. The first thing I'll talk about is our out-of-office delegation tool. So if one of your approvers is going to be out of the office, they can quickly come and set to their delegate who they want to be their delegate and the dates that they're going to be out of. Oops, get stopped here. 1 second, sorry. I was showing you the delegation tool here. They can come to our delegation tool. They can set who they want their delegate to be, as well as the dates that they're going to be out of the office. If they do that, our solution is going to see this, is going to automatically reroute the transaction to their delegate without anyone else having to touch it. So really cuts down on the really the maintenance, right, that maybe your admin team or someone has to do with a bunch of transactions when someone's out of the office, and just keeps them from sitting there, right, and waiting for someone to get back if they take 2 weeks vacation. The other tool, though, that our solution does have for management of the approval process is what we call the super approved permission. So this is a special permission that you do assign to particular roles that really allows them to, what I say, oversee the approval process. So even though you want things to follow a standard process, there might be instances where you need someone to step in and make an on-the-fly change, and your super approvers can do that. So there's a question about how the out-of-office delegation tool, where it's located. The out-of-office delegation is a page that's located within NetSuite. So if your approvers do not have access to NetSuite, there is a way for like someone that has access to the employee record. So maybe that's an HR coordinator, administrator, or a system administrator to set a delegate on their behalf if they don't have access to set it themselves. So talk about the other permission, which is prevented from approving while they're out of the office. So the question was asked, if someone sets an out of office delegate, would they be prevented from approving while they're out of the office? Depends a little bit about how it's set up. So you would potentially want to route to both the delegate and the original approver. Is that I think that's the way the question is worded. I believe we could look at setting it up that way if you wanted to route to both of them. Typically, it just goes to the delegate. So back talking about the super approved permission, right? So if someone maybe doesn't set a delegate, or you don't want to set a delegate for an approver, you just need to quickly reroute one bill to a new approver. A super approver is able to do that. So if a super approver comes into NetSuite and they look at the approval history tab, you'll see they're going to see this change approver link. I switched over to my administrator role, which is a super approver. I didn't see this in my other role. This allows a super approver to, just with a couple clicks, get this transaction rerouted to a different approver so that it can be dealt with and approved. Anytime the super approved permission is used, a reason for that change does need to be entered, right? So for audit documentation purposes, you're going to have to enter a comment here so that we can record that on the approval history tab. The other option a super approver has is just to essentially approve on behalf of someone. So they can choose to come in here, click the super approve button, and approve this. They will still have to enter a comment. So you have some sort of audit documentation purposes of why they're using this permission. But I can easily, as a super approver, kind of move this along if I need to. So there was a question asked about access on the employee record. Each role of NetSuite may look a little bit different. That out of office delegation page that I showed you is something particular to our solution. So you would get a link to that page when our solution is installed. Otherwise, the standard employee list is just, in my instance, under lists, employees. We would add fields to the employee record that would allow you to delegate someone's approval. Yeah, we'll follow up on some more information on the delegate for that particular question that was asked there. So now that I have a bill that's actually approved within NetSuite here, we can see it's an approved open status. So at this point, the bill, once it's approved, is posting to my GL. So I can run any of the native NetSuite reports that I might have, see it in my AP aging report, see it in my GL reports, all those great NetSuite reports. It's automatically available to all of those because our solution sits right inside of NetSuite. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump over. We're going to switch gears in the last couple minutes here, and we're going to start talking about vendor onboarding. So our vendor onboarding solution, what it allows is for a user to essentially send a secure form out to their vendors to collect all the information that you would typically have to manually enter into NetSuite, bring that back into NetSuite, and update the vendor record automatically. So if I go to my AP Automation dashboard here and I switch over to my vendors view, again, I can see some information about where different records are in the vendor onboarding process, vendors that have been requested, in process of onboarding, maybe have information that I need to review or out for approval. So if I'm like a vendor onboarding manager, it's my job to keep up with these things. I can quickly see all that information and kind of follow up where different vendors are in the process. If I want to onboard a new vendor, I can easily do that from the dashboard here by just clicking the request vendor link. I can also start the onboarding process from anywhere in NetSuite that I can create a vendor record. So what our solution does is when you go to create a vendor, instead of displaying a bunch of fields of, the address, the contacts, bank details, all those kind of things that you would typically have to enter to create a vendor record within NetSuite, we just give you the bare minimum fields that are required. So a subsidiary is required in NetSuite if you do have multiple subsidiaries. So you'll have to fill in the primary subsidiary of this vendor, the company name. These have to be unique, so I'm just throwing some random characters in there, and then the email address of the vendor. The reason this is required is because we're going to send that vendor an email, and we're going to ask them to provide the rest of the information so you don't have to do the data entry yourself. So as soon as I click save, what our solution is going to do is it's going to create a vendor record there essentially as a placeholder while it's waiting for the rest of the information. It's going to create this vendor record as a placeholder, but it's going to mark it as inactive. So it can't actually be used by anyone until it completes the onboarding process and is marked as active again. One thing that our solution does allow for is somebody to be what I like to refer to as the gatekeeper. So in your organization, if you have like maybe a centralized purchasing department or maybe someone in accounting that really wants to keep an eye over what vendors people are asking to be onboarded, you can have someone kind of review these onboarding requests at the front of the process before anything goes out to the vendor. So this isn't necessarily a quote unquote approval. Our solution does include approvals after you receive all of the information from the vendor, but this is really, do you want to work with this vendor? Do you actually want to request any additional information from this vendor, or do you just want to reject the onboarding request? If this isn't necessary in your organization, this can actually be skipped over. So someone wouldn't necessarily need to click the start onboarding button if everything that's kind of created just needs to immediately go into the onboarding status. But once you do kind of pull this vendor in and you decide that then you're going to be able to send them a form. When you click the send form button, it's going to take you to a page where you can enter the email addresses that need to be sent to, that this form needs to be sent to. It's going to automatically pull in the email address that we've given it earlier, but if there's multiple contacts at this organization, you can choose to add those multiple email addresses here, as well as selecting the form that you want to send them. So our solution is flexible enough that if you have the need for multiple forms, it can support that. For instance, if you're working with like US vendors versus international vendors, a lot of times there's different information that you need to collect from those, and you can kind of set up different forms for those different use cases. So when I click the send form button, our solution is going to actually send that email out to the vendor, out to the addresses that we've selected here, with a link to complete that online onboarding form. Here's an example. Here's the actual onboarding email that I just received. This can be customized with some of the information like your logo, your greeting message here, and then they would receive a link here, a button that they can click to actually go and complete the onboarding form. So once they click that link, they're going to be taken again to this online secure form here. The information that you collect from your vendor, which fields are required on this form here, is customizable. You can actually make fields required, so they couldn't submit the form unless they fill in certain pieces of information. So you can kind of customize the information that you need to collect from your vendor. I'm just going to fill in some information here. You can collect information like files, so like a W-9. If you require that a W-9 is kept on file, you can collect that through our onboarding form. If you want to pay your vendors electronically, you can collect bank details. So you can see I have a section here for ACH bank details. I can collect those. And this does tie in if you're using like a NetSuite electronic payment solution, and you're storing those bank details in the bank payment details record on the vendor record. We're going to go ahead and populate those for you. Let me enter an account number. Oops. Random account number here, routing number. This is a checking account. I can even enter some contact information. And at the very end, we ask for some information about who submitted this form, just for documentation purposes again. So once my vendor filled out all the fields that I have required for them, submitted all the information, they can go ahead and submit the form. As soon as they do this, this is automatically going to go back into NetSuite and try to update that vendor record that I've created. Yeah, so someone asked if the fields have to match to a field in NetSuite. Most of the time, yes. There are certain pieces of information, like at the bottom of the field, you can add fields to the vendor form that are just essentially informational only, like aren't going to actually update something on the vendor record. That is possible, but most of the time they're going to map back to a field on the vendor record, and there is mapping that is done as part of the setup process. So as soon as I submit that vendor form, you can see greeted with a little message letting me know that I've completed the onboarding process. If I go back into NetSuite, what I could actually do is I could go back to my dashboard. I could see, that I have a vendor request that needs to be reviewed. But as soon as I go to that vendor record and I refresh, you're going to see that all that information that was submitted on the form is automatically populated on the vendor record. So the phone number is populated for me. The address is populated for me. If I look under the relationships tab, that contact that I created, information created a contact record for me. If you're using electronic payments, again, we're going to create those bank payment detail records for you if you're using ACH payments. The form itself, we add this tab to the vendor record for storing those form responses. So you're going to have that audit trail again of all the form responses that come back from your vendor. You can click on the form response and you can actually view what your vendor submitted. In this particular case, something changed, right? So what our solution is going to do is it's going to automatically apply anything that's new, but we're not going to overwrite data that you already have. So if your vendor submits something that's different than what you already have, we want someone to review that, make sure that you're okay accepting that change. And you can see on my form, I gave a slightly different company name. If I want to go ahead and take that company name that was on the response, I can easily hit apply and review and accept that change. Let's go ahead and do that. What it's going to do is it's going to take me into the edit mode of the vendor record. It's going to update the corresponding field that it needs to. I am in the edit mode, so if there's anything else I want to change while I'm here, I could go ahead and do that. But if everything else looks good, I can go ahead and just click save. So again, it really streamlines the process of getting that information into NetSuite, still allows you, that audit trail and the ability to review anything that comes in from your vendors. Once you've collected all that information, you can go ahead and mark the vendor as completely onboarded. And then you can optionally route these vendors for approval. So the same approval solution that we already talked about on bills, it does work on vendors here as well. We're going to store the information on the approval history tab for you here. So if you have, certain people that should be approving vendors that would route to them, they could go ahead and approve that. We can capture that approval here. If anything happens, edits are made to the vendor record, you can make those trigger and the vendor need to go back to the approval process. So again, you make sure that all those audits are approved. You'll also notice you don't lose the ability to send a vendor a form once the vendor is completely onboarded. So I still have that send form button. If vendor's bank details need to change, instead of me receiving some email that maybe looks a little bit fishy, you could actually come into NetSuite. You could choose to send them a form again. They would get another email. They'd be able to fill in the information that they want to. That would be going to the email address that you have on file for them. Again, you have that audit trail of those updates if something like that happens. So that's our vendor onboarding solution. I know we've covered a lot in this call. I think we've covered everything that we have to for today. Bob, you think we should open it up for live questions if anyone wants to ask anything that hasn't been addressed so far?
Yes, we can definitely do that. And if you have a question that you want to share verbally, if you could just raise your hand using the raise hand feature, and then I can open up your line to be able to communicate. Otherwise, feel free to continue to use the Q&A section as well. Okay, I don't see any questions, so last call for questions. Otherwise, we can wrap up just a few minutes early. And again, there will be a recording of this session, so you should receive an automated email with the link to the recording. Please feel free to forward that to anyone else you think might be interested. And stay tuned, we will have future quarterly webinars. If you would like something more personalized as well, or you have any specific questions for the team that come up later, please do feel free to reach out to us. You can submit a form through our website, or if you have anyone's direct contact information, that works as well. So we appreciate everyone's time. Have a good rest of your day and happy Memorial Weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.